Welcome back to the Builder's Bench, where politics meets construction. I'm Craig Larkins, and we're coming to you just a week after Canada's federal election. Big moves are already underway. Prime Minister Mark Carney held his first post-election press conference on Friday, laying out the immediate roadmap. So a new cabinet will be announced the week of May 12th. Parliament is set to officially resume May 26th, and the throne speech will be delivered by King Charles on May 27th. And meanwhile, on the Conservative side, Conservative MP Damien Carrick, who won a staggering 81% of the vote in Battle River Crowfoot in Alberta, has resigned, clearing the path for Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who lost his seat in the election to run in a by-election. There's lots to talk about today, so let's dig in. Joining me on the bench today, we have Louis-Philippe Champagne, Associate Vice President, Public Affairs and Industry Practices for the Canadian Construction Association. And making an appearance on the first time on the Builder's Bench, we have Sara Clark, Director, Public Affairs, Impact Public Affairs. Thank you both for joining today.
I see you.
Thanks for having us.
So much to talk about today. A lot of action happened just like the days after the actual vote was called. So I just want to talk about, we often get into the jargon of politics and there's terms thrown out. We're talking about a throne speech. So what is a throne speech, first of all, LP, and what's the significance of it?
That's a good question. There's a whole lot that's going to happen in a matter of a few weeks, and that always is the case when there's a new government being elected. It is worth pointing out that when we have the re-election of a prime minister and its government, which is the case right now, because Mark Carney was prime minister for the last few weeks, this simplifies things quite a bit. So the caretaker mode of government, which is an important point to start, this interesting dynamic where the entire public service is told, keep doing your job, make sure the company move forward, but don't do anything new or too different or influenced by the campaign, so that when the new government comes in, they can transition into it. This caretaker mode can often last for quite some time after the election when you need to switch to an entirely new government with a very different agenda. This is not the case this time because the same prime minister comes straight back into office, the same cabinet is still there. Now this might change and most likely will change as we go into the swearing of a new cabinet. Those are really the two big parts: the new cabinet, the throne speech that you just mentioned, and to an extent the staffing around this. So let's answer your question. What's a throne speech? Well, it's a really interesting mechanic in our government, as we are inspired on the Westminster style of government, or bicameral UK-based parliament, where the speech from the throne is really the speech from the monarch, this time around quite literally, normally by the Governor General, to convey to Canadians what will be the priority of their government. Because let's keep in mind, in our structure of government, the Prime Minister and his cabinet govern on behalf of the King or the Governor General. So those priorities that are put in place by the executive branch are really the priority of the Crown. This is what the throne speech is. So what we'll see in a matter of a few weeks is a really complex presentation delivered by the King that will be a snapshot of what the government hopes to achieve in its mandate. This is extremely important for us in politics as we benchmark our advocacy and work all around it.
Is it very rare to have the King, as you were just mentioning, do the throne speech? It was since 1977 that we've had that?
77 was the last time a session was opened. The last time a throne speech of a new government was in 1954, I think, or in the 50s. It is rare. It is uncommon. And, if we want to go into discussion mode, I'll say it is entirely unnecessary. I'm a bit of an outlier of a Quebecer myself. I don't mind the monarchy at all. And I'm quite excited about this. But from a political standpoint, this was a really strange decision from Mark Carney, one that he justified by saying it's because of the trade climate, it's to flex our muscle facing Donald Trump, which is a fair point because Donald Trump has great respect for the King, and this might play in the balance. But fundamentally, telling Canadian right after you're elected, when you're in peak of your honeymoon, I'm going to bring the King to the throne speech, when the majority of Canadians are not great fan of monarchy, especially not in Quebec, where a significant portion of the sovereignists and the Bloc supporters have decided to vote Liberal. So interesting dynamic, a bit of a rough start in my opinion, but we'll see if that goes into more.
Thank you, LP. So, Sara, obviously there's an army of people behind everyone that is elected to Parliament. What do you think the scene is right now at the PMO's office? Are you seeing a flurry of new hirings?
I think there's a lot happening, obviously, right now as the staff who were working from the leadership campaign to the election campaign are now being finalized and who's going to kind of take their spots and take their seats in PMO. When we think about what the staffing makeup is going to look like in that office, I strongly suspect that we'll see a balance of folks who have been involved in the party, who have been involved with the federal government for some time over the last few years, but increasingly we'll also see some new faces, some folks who might have worked in the private sector, who come maybe from a non-traditional background and are now entering politics. And the reason why I say that is because we have seen kind of that makeup in terms of the folks that have been surrounding Prime Minister Carney on the campaign trail, whether that was during the leadership or whether that was during the election race, who tended to come more from a private sector background, who were economists, who worked for banks or who worked in those kinds of sectors. And for consistency's sake, it would make a lot of sense if those same kind of figures or similar individuals or similar backgrounds also stepped into positions in PMO.
So it's a very interesting week as well. Prime Minister Carney is a very busy man. He's heading to Washington apparently tomorrow to meet with Mr. Trump. And then next week, we're already talking about the possibility of a new cabinet. So when we go down that road, how does the appointment work? Do we have any surprise or some star candidates that we're looking at or anything in that realm, LP?
I hope we'll have surprises, and this is where it becomes difficult to, segment prediction from opinion. Uh, I think Mark Carney needs to draw a clear line between his administration and the Trudeau administration. With great respect for what they've done over the past 10 years, there was a lot of positive that came out of Justin Trudeau and his cabinet, but the reality is it's a damaged brand. Mark Carney managed to get it through the election and get re-elected with a very strong minority government. Maybe he would have been able to do better if the ghost of Trudeau wasn't around all that much, and especially at the end of the campaign, we've seen that slight decline in the poll as people were less concerned about Trump and more thinking about that 4 years or four mandates, thank you, of the Liberals. So how does he do that? Well, it's not an easy situation to be in. There's a number of new faces in caucus. Many of them have run with a very clear intent to become member of cabinet. Some very well-versed executive from the banking sector, from provincial administration or municipal administration, former mayor and whatnot. It is very likely that some of these figures will make it to cabinet, but again, nobody really knows. What I'm hoping to see is for a number of Trudeau Day minister, even if they're well respected and capable, to maybe be considered for lesser role or entirely out of cabinet, not because they haven't done a good job, not because they don't deserve a seat at cabinet, but just to showcase to the Canadian that we are in a different place with a different leader and a very different agenda. If he doesn't do that, what we'll see very quickly is Pierre Poilievre on his own campaign trail in Alberta now saying it's the same old Liberal like I told you so, and we'll see a number of organizations say the same thing.
Can we just stick with that? So, what is the timeline usually when we're talking about a by-election? I mean, we just went through a federal election. The MP resigned in Alberta. What's the timeline?
Well, that's interesting because it is entirely to the Prime Minister prerogative within boundary of Parliament and Election Canada. But this time around, we have a very clear direction from Mark Carney during that very same press conference saying, I'm not going to play a game. I can't remember the word he used. Straight, no games, I think was the words. To say as soon as the party decide that someone stepped down and Pierre Poilievre can run there, I'll let them do so for democratic reason. I want to have a counterpart in Parliament. Now, the reality is that a campaign still needs to happen. You cannot nominate a member of parliament, even if the party decided to run no one against him, which I don't think is in their best interest. You still need to get he or she needs to get elected. So this will take some time for Election Canada to trigger the election based on Prime Minister's announcement, eventually to conduce this entire campaign and then get someone in Parliament. The harsh reality is that the time for Conservatives to have a strong leader in the House is right now, the moment the House come back in May 26, leading into Budget 2025, hopefully. Without that voice in Parliament, it's going to be a bit challenging, so they'll have to delegate a parliamentary leader in the meantime. Same dynamic for the NDP, who themselves will have to deal with a lot more challenges, a full leadership race, a much smaller cabinet, but at this moment, there's nobody across the aisle to face Mark Carney.
That's such an interesting time to be in. I would love to be at QP during then. So, Sarah, I wanted to toss it back to when we're talking cabinet. What should construction industry be watching for in these appointees and any candidates that stand out in those certain roles?
Yeah, that's an important question. And before I answer kind of that exactly I was asked, there's a few things to keep in mind when we're considering the formation of this cabinet. The first is size. Former Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet was criticized quite significantly towards the end of his tenure for how large it had become. And we saw Prime Minister Carney really shrink cabinet when he took power. Now, if he'll be able to, whether or not he'll be able to stick to that same size, very streamlined cabinet remains to be seen when there is kind of a great emphasis on making sure that folks who are strong ministers or who are strong members of parliament are represented. Some of those new folks, like you talked about, that that would likely perform very well in cabinet or who would bring important expertise and or regional diversity to cabinet. He's also signaled his intention for gender parity, which personally I'm very pleased about. But that regional diversity aspect is also going to be incredibly important. The Team Canada umbrella narrative that has really framed the last few months and will continue, I would say, to frame the next few months as well, is, made obvious in the selection of cabinet ministers when you have folks who are representing every province and every territory. So those are just some considerations that I'm sure the Prime Minister and his team are taking into account. At the end of the day, we could speculate probably forever on who we think are going to step into certain roles, and maybe I'll save everybody listening that lecture itself. But fundamentally, the most important thing for whoever steps into a cabinet position, whether it be Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, whether it be transport, is that they are prepared to work with industry and to work with stakeholder groups to, achieve mutual goals and execute the vision that is being laid out by the Prime Minister. We certainly had some glimpses of that in the press conference. We will have that image continue to crystallize when the throne speech is delivered. But it is becoming increasingly evident and increasingly clear that the only way that we can really achieve the goals that are being put into place is by ensuring that the federal government is working with stakeholders to get the ball rolling and to get plans actually into policies and into progress.
I couldn't agree
It,
more. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
can I just jump in because I think there's a few points that really need to emphasize there. In that press conference and in previous statement, it did commit to do these two things that Sarah just brought up, right? Parity and smaller size, more efficiency, I think is how they define that. Those are two challenging things to put beside one another. I am confident that the cabinet we'll see in a couple of weeks will be much bigger than the cabinet we have now. The transition cabinet through the election was extremely small, like we haven't seen in a long time. The best example I give to showcase this is the Minister of Employment, Stephen McKinnon, who is currently leading an entire organization that used to be 5 ministers. He's doing that by himself. Right? I love to see that kind of efficiency, but it also makes it very difficult for them to govern and take care of all these specialized files when there's only so many people at the table. You cannot have a properly regionally balanced cabinet with parity if you don't grow that size at least to an extent. I don't think they'll go as bad as it was in the last few years of Justin Trudeau, but I think it will have to be significantly bigger than it is now.
Thank you, LP. And I couldn't agree more. I hope whoever gets appointed to whichever role that they're ready to hit the ground running because it's particularly even here in BC, we had our provincial election in the fall and then we rolled into the new year with all this uncertainty. So there's been a lot of uncertainty and we just really just want to get to work and have the support of all levels of government to get work done and to start building. So it's a segue, Sarah, into my next question. And I have to thank you and your team at Impact for the campaign Construction for Canadians and of course CCCA. As an advocate for the industry and working here in Vancouver, it was a massive support system, information source for people, including myself, but the general public. So congratulations on the campaign.
Thank you so much.
What some successes, with some big high notes from it for you?
I think probably one of the most gratifying outcomes from the campaign was seeing the ways in which construction associations and construction leaders from coast to coast really bought in. And they took the campaign content and they made it their own. And it was really amazing to see the industry, which is so broad and so diverse and so nuanced in its needs from the West Coast to the East Coast, come together behind a unified voice and celebrate the industry, but also call for action. I thought that was exceptionally incredible, and I'll miss scrolling on LinkedIn and seeing all the posts from the different organizations who participated in the campaign. I think what was also exceptionally gratifying was seeing not just how folks who are, work as industry advocates came together to participate, but also folks who are on the ground and driving the industry forward and who have worked in this industry day in and day out, sometimes generationally in their families, participate in the campaign and get involved. And, that looked like folks sending a letter to candidates in their ridings, or speaking up about the importance of construction when candidates came to their door, or called them. And I know that folks in my community got calls from their local candidate, and I know that construction was part of the conversations that took place over the phone. So that was also pretty incredible to witness, because at the end of the day, the campaign wasn't just about the construction industry. It was about the impact that construction has on Canadians. And hopefully that was aptly captured in the tagline, "Construction for Canadians." But there's so much to be proud of here, and I think it's really built a very solid foundation for the industry and industry advocates to continue to build upon, pardon the pun, as we work with the new federal government.
One key component that I appreciated during my days in politics was I love door knocking. I love knocking on that door and I love having that conversation. And there was a segment on the website that gave people the information to ask people when they come to their door. So what's the next step? Because I often think that people assume that once they're elected, it's hands off, they have no access to politicians, but you really do. You have their phone number and you have their email. So how do we keep engaging and keep that campaign moving forward and make it bigger?
Yeah. There's a couple different, plans that are going to start taking shape over the next few weeks. And the first is that, we're going to work with the Canadian Construction Association and with industry advocates to ensure that we're following up with members of parliament or candidates that were reelected as members of parliament who showed their support for the construction industry and continue to strengthen those relationships, celebrate the industry, and get things done. The other part of it is there are new members of parliament across the country who we have not had an opportunity to engage with, or may have not had an opportunity to engage with in the same way. And so there is going to be some education in terms of industry priorities that needs to take place. And again, identification of folks who, have a personal connection to the industry perhaps, or who would be more likely to stand up and champion some of the priorities or causes that are important to construction in Canada. But exactly to your point, folks have access to their members of parliament whether or not it's an election period. And I think that during the election period, that access can feel a little bit less fettered because they're coming to your door and they're calling you on the phone. And there is that sense of, I am trying to appeal to secure your vote. And so that connection and relationship that you have with the candidates in your community can feel a little less intimidating than the connection relationship you might have with a member of parliament. But I encourage folks who, are still driven by the enthusiasm to defend their industry, to champion their industry, or to see real change, to feel empowered to continue building their relationship with their member of parliament. Your member of parliament is your representative, is your voice in the House of Commons. And you are entitled to share your concerns and your priorities with them so that the needs of your community and the needs of you as a constituent are accurately reflected and represented in the House of Commons. So while Construction for Canadians as an election campaign might, have very sadly drawn to a close, the essence of the campaign and empowering and enabling Canadians from coast to coast to feel like they can speak up on behalf of construction and feel like they can speak directly to political influencers and decision makers, that continues. And, true success is not just having seen folks engage with the campaign in that way during the election, but seeing folks continue to engage with those priorities and with those campaign fundamentals, even now that the new federal government has been formed.
Thank you, sir. I think it was ULP that said in one of our first episodes, it's almost like people need to start book clubs and talk about politics and what they can do and kind of have a champion in your community to go forth and send those emails and calls. So where do we go, LP, from here? And as advocates, as associations, people on the front lines really amplifying the voices of our membership.
Industry association, regardless of industry, is a mosaic, right? It's not a simple uh, one size fit all campaign that will fix all the problem. It is really uh, making sure we paint the entire spectrum of what need to be done and need to happen, and then convey it to the right person. Uh, when we decided to launch Construction for Canadian at the CCA, we wanted to do three things. We wanted to engage our membership, that is, both our network of local association that really step up their game and join that movement, but also the actual member, the construction company, their staff, their executive, their workforce to join the message and be there for the election. But it was also to set up that foundation, that cornerstone of what's to come for the next 4 years and how we can best influence and be there to work with the federal government going forward. And I think we've succeeded in these first two goals. Now it's time to build that third one. How are we going to do this? Well, it's a very diversified approach, as I just said. I think in the immediate term, we need to do a number of things very quickly. There will be a new cabinet coming into force or being sworn in very, very soon in matters of days. We will need to engage with these new members of cabinet very rapidly. There's a number of portfolio that matter to CCA. I wouldn't say all of them are top of the list, but a number of them are. Of course, infrastructure is a big one. Transport is a big one. Finance is a big one. Immigration is a big one. And the list goes on for a fair bit. Right, so defining what those portfolios are, because sometimes you can merge and change these actual terminology, and then who will these be in these portfolio will be important. So CCA will engage on behalf of the industry first and foremost with that new cabinet, securing meeting, briefing them on what we believe is important for the industry. And the good news is, this time around, we see a government that came to office with these big promises of building Canada, and it's time to build. And we are really excited about this. As a matter of fact, one of the cool components of the campaign that we haven't mentioned yet was that collection of videos from candidates all across the country to say why did they care about construction. And you see former member of cabinet and MPs going in front of a local construction site and selfieing a video saying, hey, I care about you guys because you create job in my riding, because you're building our communities, right? Interestingly enough, the Liberal is the party by far that sent us the most video, right? And it really showcased the commitment not just of HQ, not just of the Prime Minister, but of the entire caucus and ecosystem of the Liberals to say, hey, we actually care about construction company and construction job. So we believe as we go to that new cabinet, that message will resonate. Past that, there's a million options and a million things we want to do. Our IL Day is always one of our favorite events for the membership. Every year in the fall, we bring about 100 construction experts from all across the country from our network of association to meet members of parliament. And in a single day, Sara and her team will book us 60, 70 meetings with MP. They work late into the night to make it work. And then we end up having a massive influence and presence on Parliament Hill during that one day because all people do is talk to us. So in the House of Commons, in the back chamber, they'll talk to one another and say, hey, have you met CCA? Yeah, I had a meeting with them this morning, right? And then our key priorities of workforce, of infrastructure, of procurement get to resonate within parliaments. So we're really excited to see not only what will happen in the next 7 weeks, which in my opinion will be the most critical, leading into Budget 25, in my opinion, new cabinet, speech from the throne, etc., but also starting to plan our fall 2025, where we'll have our meeting with the public service that we call the Meech Lake meetings, but also our Hill Day. So all of these pieces together build that mosaic where we can do very strong industry advocacy on your behalf.
I actually participated in my first Hill Day last November, and it was quite the experience. And I just have to say, going into the fall again coming up, it's going to be quite an interesting experience being able to introduce industry to the new MPs as well. Sara, did you want to jump in on anything?
I think I'll just say, obviously, Hill Day has a very special place in my heart, but it's going to be absolutely critical this year because of exactly the reason why you just outlined. There are so many new members of parliament that we need to make sure that we're having those conversations with them, but also because, it's such a critical time right now for the federal government and for industry to meet the moment. We've talked about the importance of building, and there really has been this kind of emphasis placed on getting things going, building a Canada that is, less integrated, less reliant on the United States, that has a very strong economy, that has a strong workforce, and construction is such a key part of those elements. And, this Hill Day in particular, and on top of the advocacy work that LP mentioned, is going to be critical in positioning construction as that kind of core industry partner to achieve those goals that have been set out by the next federal government, to drive our economy forward, to keep Canadians employed, to strengthen trade, and to kind of return us to a very competitive position on the global stage. And that's, those are causes and priorities that MPs from across the country, from across party lines, can get behind. And, it's so important that we continue to drive that message home. And Hill Day really is a perfect opportunity to do that.
Couldn't agree more, and definitely looking forward to this year. So I do have to switch gears because at some point we do have to talk about Mr. Trump and tariffs. I do think that the federal election also did provide provinces the opportunity to really start recognizing construction as well. Here in BC alone, there was legislation introduced last Friday, Infrastructure Projects Act, I believe it was, where streamlining a lot of projects in municipalities, whether it's schools, hospitals, the big projects that are kind of tied up. So it's nice to see that happening. What do you think is going to happen going forward with Mr. Carney, Trump, and the tariff situation, and just the current situation that we have going forward? Or what are your hopes, I guess?
I'm starting to be really concerned for the health of Donald Trump. Like, it seems that every week it's getting a little bit crazier. The recent posts we've seen on social media, again, bringing back that rhetoric of 51 state, not ruling out military intervention in Greenland, the AI photo of him in the Pope chair, like, this is getting to a place where it's interesting, at the very least, to see what's happening in the White House. I'll be a bit pessimist here, but I think it's something we need to be mindful of and keep as a reality. I still don't think that Donald Trump is the problem that we need to solve. I think Donald Trump is a symptom to a much broader problem that we're all facing. The United States that we've known for decades is changing. It's changing fast, and honestly, it's changing for good reason. The almost entirety of the people alive in the U.S. today have been seeing 5 or 6 decades of worsening, challenging time for the U.S. Right? It started with the Cold War, which was a difficult conflict for them to go through and win in any kind of shape or form. Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq, those were really challenging conflicts where, to the American people, that might not be the most educated person in terms of war, conflict, international trade, and whatnot. What they see is the U.S. getting involved in all these regions of the world and not really securing any weapon of mass destruction or really securing a victory, but that's their tactical order going to work there. What we see more and more is the average American saying, I don't care so much about the security in Europe. I don't care so much about being the hegemon of the world in the economy. What I want is to own a home and be able to keep it and get my job and watch my TV show, right? And I think Donald Trump very successfully managed to connect with these people and say, I hear you, right? Let's work on what keeps America together, not so much our reputation in the rest of the world. And this is most likely going to stick around way past Donald Trump, right? Even if he finishes mandate and move on, there will be a Republican candidate after that. The Democrats are not immune to be influenced by that dynamic as well of protectionism and closure to their own market, if that's what the majority of the American people wants. So I think we're in a very difficult place here where it's not just Donald Trump, it's not just the Republican, it's a changing landscape for the US. And what does that mean for Canadian? Well, it's a real challenge, because America will always remain a very strong partner to Canada, no matter what we say or do. They're way too close, they're way too big, and we share too much of an integrated border. So that means that for commerce, for international security, we will need to work with them and play fair with them. Yet at the same time, we need to use this as a very strong wake-up call to diversify our trade, to think of our own sovereignty and how we manage ourselves. I think 20 years from now, Canada will most likely think positively of Donald Trump and say thank you for giving us such of that awareness of our need to be a sovereign nation by ourselves and not depend on the US. Now the challenge is, how do we go from where we are to where we need to be as soon as possible? CC have been advocating for years to say we need to drastically increase our trade enabling infrastructure because we're no longer seen as a proper trade partner to nations beyond the US. Now it's blowing in our face, but we're hopeful that in the next 4 years, and most likely past that, we will see very clear targeted investment, change in policy to make sure we can trade amongst ourselves. That's referring to trade barrier, but also trading with Asia and Europe, you're referring to trade infrastructure. This will allow us to diversify ourselves, but also stand much stronger facing the US, where what we're probably going to witness in the next few months is a total collapse of what remains of NAFTA, now CUSDC, and see where we go forward.
I would
I think
most definitely
LP, if
say
I
that as a
could,
wake-up call. Yes, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
no worries. I would say I think LP touches on a very important point in that answer, which is that with all the discussions and the anxiety that folks are experiencing around the current situation and with tariffs, it is easy to forget that, we were facing challenges before this current context, and we will continue to face challenges after the fact. And so, you know, we the da- you know, the dangerous thing to do right now is to silo the solutions that we develop to only meet the current moment and not consider the context within which they're taking place. To your point, LP, we need to we need to improve our trade enabling infrastructure. We also need to be thinking more long term outside just of the immediate short term impacts that tariffs are going to have on the Canadian economy. That means longer term infrastructure investment, longer term planning to ensure that the steps that we are taking now to position Canada as a competitive nation, to reduce our reliance on the United States, to strengthen our economy, are steps that are going to set us up for success in the future, not just in the next few years or in the short term. Certainly, I think there is instinct to react to what is happening right now with policies that will support us presently, but we also need to be thinking about our long-term horizon and what needs to be made true for Canada to stand strong, not just within the next 6 to 12 month outlook period, but within the next 5-10 years. And I mean, Craig, in BC, that looks like implementing policies like prompt payment legislation,
Yeah.
where certainly that might have come as a reaction to the discussions that are taking place right now, or in part as a reaction to the context that we find ourselves in, but is certainly emblematic of the fact that the industry has been facing challenges before the current situation. And if this legislation is not passed, we'll continue to face those challenges if not adequately supported. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
I think it's important to point out as well, when the prompt payment, just touching on that, Sarah, legislation was announced that the Governor General had appointed her staff to do that there's a process to this as well. And there is time to put into, first read, second read, committee debate. So in doing so, yes, we need to get work done, but there is a process, and government's slow moving it sometimes. It's a long game, as some like to say. So I just remember at the end of Prime Minister Carney's press conference on Friday, he made a quote of, "It's time to come together to put on our Team Canada sweaters and win big." And I really, really hope we start to see that right across the country in the coming weeks. So, LP, let's just do a quick recap. What can we expect over the next, I'd say, month out of Ottawa?
A lot. Hopefully, everything we want. This most likely will keep happening. So, seeing investment come to fruition will require the return of the House, proper legislation, speech of the throne, cabinet, and then that budget 25 is that cornerstone that I'm so hopeful we'll see in June. I cannot imagine they'll wait until the fall to release a budget. It's a prerogative that they can choose, but I think that would be damaging. They have everything they need to convert their policy platform with the work they've been doing for the entire previous mandate and turn that into a sound budget for 25, allowing the government to now move forwards in these important policy announcements that we've seen in the last few days.
Sarah, any final remarks for us?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say, kind of on that Team Canada note, is that the power of symbols has really played kind of a significant role in this election campaign, this leadership campaign. I mean, LP, even I'll bring it back to what you said about having King Charles come in and read the throne speech. That in and of itself is a powerful symbol. And when we think about what denotes the Canadian identity and what folks identify with as being Canadian, construction to me and the industry as it kind of exists in Canada is a key part of that. You have small businesses that are family owned, that are grown up out of stories that are extraordinarily inspiring and empowering to listen to. You also have larger businesses from folks who have expanded to Canada because the market provided so much opportunity. And as the next federal government, or as the new federal government seeks to deliver on this kind of Team Canada approach and come together to drive our nation forward, my biggest hope is that construction is recognized as a core component of that, because you cannot build a Canada that is strong, that is, has a robust and resilient economy and communities that adequately support Canadians from coast to coast without construction. It was one of the core messages of our campaign. It will continue to be a core message that we drive home. And as we all kind of wear our metaphorical Team Canada jerseys, it's an important lesson for us to remember as well.
Couldn't agree more. Some very important dates coming up. Actually, the VRCA has a construction leadership forum coming up this weekend, hosting a panel on just this topic about the future of the industry. So it'll be interesting to see the conversations that come out of that. The Builders Bench is here. That's why we're here. So we're going to break down those next coming up dates. So stay engaged, stay vocal. Your vote built the future. Now it's time to shape it. Thank you both for joining us today, and we'll be in touch. I think we're back next week, May 12th or the following week, to talk about the cabinet and possibly what's happening with the throne speech. So thank you both for joining me today.
Exciting
Thank you so
times.
much.